Welcome to the 5E podcast. I'm here today with Tom Winstanley, CTO and Head of New Ventures at NTT, alongside Laurence Norman, VP of Sports Technology. Thank you guys for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it, and thank you for letting us in your innovation lab.
You're welcome.
Tom, perhaps you could start off and just explain a little bit about your background, how you got into the consulting and your position in NTT, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I started back in the 90s in telco, straight out of uni. Chance meeting of minds got me into software development in that space, building customer care and billing platforms. Fairly rapidly worked out that was not where I wanted to spend my life, although it is, there's a great business to be done there. And I ended up being the founder of the digital practice for a company out in Germany. Okay. I then joined NTT Data about 8 years ago now, something like that, to initially head up the digital consulting practice here in the UK. And for the last now almost 4 years, I've been having this role of CTO across all of our industries here in the UK, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. And as you said, heading up our new ventures activities, which is all things innovation, connecting also to our R&D centres around the world, co-creation with clients, with partners, all the fun stuff.
Yeah, all the fun stuff. I was going to say that, the innovation, the bleeding edge tech, that must be the fun part of the job, getting involved with all of those things. For sure. And I mean, the way that we always look at this stuff is there are multiple horizons around innovation, right? You've got, we're a Japanese organisation, and again, we'll probably talk a bit about that. But there's the Kaizen view on innovation, that's continuous improvement, all of that good stuff that's going on in the core business. That's maybe not so much bleeding edge, but it's completely vital to the way that we work. But a lot of people don't know about the other two horizons from the Japanese lean movement. So Kakushen and Kaikaku. Forgive me for the utterly. it's slightly better than how I'd say.
I could get that horribly wrong.
But that is those further out horizons. Okay. And so disruptive technology, Kakushen, and the role that bleeding edge technologies can play in that part is also part of the job. And that's the mix is what makes it fun.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for that. And Laurence, how about yourself?
It's probably less interesting than that. But it is longer, at least. So I started I've also been in telco business on the industry side more, to be honest. So I started off working at BT, did a bit of work with T-Mobile, ended up at Deutsche Telekom doing a lot of corporate stuff, also in the BSS space. So I was probably buying the stuff that Tom was selling, although I don't think we ever did that way together. And then I moved into NTT Data actually about 10 years ago, so during its international growth phase, when it had gone through a series of acquisitions of different brands, and as it all came together into a single brand, I joined there in the telco media and high-tech business unit. And I've been sort of moving around that space ever since then, working with all our big clients. So I'm also, as well as being in the sports tech area, I'm also the chief architect for our telco media high-tech business. So I get involved with a lot of the bigger projects and clients that we have. And then on the sports tech side, that really came out of getting involved in some of the sports sponsorships that NTT have. So NTT do a number of, and NTT Data as well as part of that, do a number of sports sponsorships over a number of properties. And all of those have some level of technology showcase that we do to highlight what we do as a business. And I got involved in that because it's interesting. And also, I think I was looking at it as it was a bit of it wasn't as impactful as it could be, so trying to make it more impactful. So with that, I've taken a bit of control of that over the last few years, and been enjoying it ever since. So, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Yeah, I can't wait to get on to talk about some of the work that you did with the Open, but we'll get onto that a little bit later on during the show. So a little bit of background for some of our viewers and listeners about NTT. So I think this is a brand that a lot of people know within the industry, but perhaps don't know the history of NTT. Obviously, Japanese company. Quick sort of potted history on the brand, Tom?
Yeah, for sure. So, NTT Group obviously is a Japanese organisation, Nippon Telephone and Telegraph. It is the Japanese incumbent telco. That's where it started, but it's long since expanded beyond that. So, although the history of the group is in innovation in and around communications, outside the growth has been in two areas. One has been around data centres and network infrastructure globally, and we have a sister organisation, NTT Limited, that is very, very focused on the future in that space. And then you've got NTT Data, where the glue, we're not tiny in our own right, we're about 140,000 employees globally, 5th largest systems integrator in the world, depending on how you measure and how the yen falls. And people always assume that we are a telco niche supplier, and that's not true at all. Actually, our largest market globally is actually financial services.
Okay.
But we also work in manufacturing, automotive, and utilities. Here in the UK, obviously, we do have particular expertise around telco media, but we cover a very, very broad range of industries.
Yeah.
And from consulting through systems integration into business process management and outsourcing of core technologies for our clients.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that. I think with a business, you know, the size of NTT and NTT Data, it's easy to kind of think of you guys as a telco house, right, as to working in that industry. And even I didn't know that until you just said that the largest side was obviously finance.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's because you get so entrenched within those markets and you spend so many years within them, you just don't really see the breadth and size of it. But I think one of the things that I really want to get into is the technology and innovation side that you guys are working in, the phrase Society 5.0 and sustainability. Yeah. Society 5.0, I think is such a fantastic phrase. I mean, a lot of people talk about Industry 4.0, IoT, but this is a less used term that I haven't heard a lot of. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a typically Japanese thing, I would say. So, and what the 1.0 and the 2.0 were probably previously is probably best confined to history. But the idea is that we are reaching a new era. Okay. So, information age, we're kind of reaching the end of that. That was industry or society 4.0. And the about 5 years ago now, the Japanese government actually put out a really pivotal white paper around the need for a new society, and a new society that is making real use of all of that incredible technology, both communications technology and high technology from an application development point of view, from the use cases across the whole of society. But at the same time, it needs to balance that with effectively a sustainable future. It's all well and good as talking about hyper-connected, smart services that are ubiquitously available, the data that is required to make that a reality, and the infrastructure that's required to make that a reality. If we continue down the path that we are today, without changing some of that underpinning technology, then we're going to break the planet. And so Society 5.0 is the idea, use the technology, but invest in building a more equitable society. And, as I say, typically Japanese phrase, but for us, I think it really resonates today, especially post-pandemic. People are reassessing what is the right balance between the, let's say, commercial and the societal. How do you square that circle? Yeah. And that is what we as a group are actually investing in. So we think that we're actually, although the group has always been about the social mission, because we're part of the NTT group, which is social infrastructure in the Japanese market, this idea of purpose-led organisation, of making a difference, of impact, is right at the heart of all of the investments that we're making. We talked before about the substantial investments that the group is making into R&D. And we spend about $3.6 billion a year in R&D, and of that, 80% is going into a program called IOWN, so the Innovative Optical and Wireless Network. Not the catchiest of titles, I have to admit, for what is a really remarkable program that's trying to develop that Society 5.0. How do you get smart products and smart services out to the market at scale without changing the underpinning infrastructure? You can't. So there's an all-photonic network in there. There is a different flavour of computing, and we hope maybe we can talk a bit more about that in a while, that's taking in photonic computing and quantum computing in a more coherent way. And then sitting on top of that, you've got digital twin computing, interoperability of twins, and that's where it comes back to you mentioned Industry 4.0. Complete circle on this is imagine Industry 4.0 applied to the entire society at scale. That is Society 5.0.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff as well, and I know like we're definitely going to come on to digital twin 100%. But the sustainability kind of thing is something that you mentioned after the pandemic and stuff that people are taking really seriously. Us ourselves, we're in the process of going B Corp because it's going to be a thing that you kind of have to do eventually. We spoke about something off camera that was really interesting. That was the Internet of Trees, which I find quite catchy compared to the ION. But the Internet of Trees was really interesting. So do you mind if we touch on that a little bit as well?
Sure. Laurence, you want to talk about it?
Or? Yeah. So it's I know we'll dive into digital twins in the round a bit later. But this is some. Before we do, can I just add kind of 3 points to the bits you made, which I think just to me at least personally adds a bit more context and value to my own view of that. So and working for a Japanese company, one thing I have noticed is there's a much longer term view of things. This is I think typically of an Asian companies and Asian points of view is it's not looking at we still run quarterly sales targets and annual stuff. There is this much longer term vision that is there and is kind of stuck with. And the second point is it's not, as you said, significant investment goes into driving real tangible technology transformation in that space. So this isn't a CSR play, it's not a bit of public relations, this isn't us going carbon neutral or planting a few trees to offset some of our stuff. It's fundamental shift of how we'll all be operating in society and technology in 10 years' time. And those are the things I kind of wanted to bring out. That those are it's a fundamental. It's compelling and it's important and it has significant investment inside it as well as the points I make. So back to the Internet of Trees. So that's so this is part of our new digital twin centre of excellence. So we're building out capability in this area. So as well as those, I won't say the different time horizons, but there's the long-term horizon, which is the ION work, which is these fundamental shifts, and there's the more, and I get involved in more of the grounded work, which might be how do we take some of the, more ready cooked, or what does Boris say? What does he say?
A lot of stuff. A lot of stuff you don't want to repeat. That could have been anything. Just sat there playing with paper, making it all up.
Technology that's ready to kind of deploy and use, but still is innovative in its deployment, and then apply it to these kind of ESG process. So how can we do that? And Internet of Trees is a program we're doing with in Calabria, in collaboration with the government there, on how do you monitor the impact of forestry management within certain regions, and using Internet of Things, so connected device technology and digital twin capability to understand. And that could be everything from understanding the layout of these forests, how wind, how air, for example, flows using fluid dynamic calculations through the forest, which might start helping manage wildfires, which are becoming more prominent as well, but also maximising tree growth in terms of CO2 equivalent, so CO2 capture basically, and oxygen release, and how to manage biodiversity within there, but all through connected technology within those trees. And the things that have made it possible, I guess, have been, like a lot of these things, that people talk about them a lot. IoT's been talked about a lot, and people still don't quite know why it's relevant, because it's a class of technology rather than an outcome or a purpose. But each of those pieces of technology in their own right don't really do enough. So IoT sensor devices that don't have long battery life are interesting but useless. If there isn't the right kind of radio wireless technology to connect them seamlessly and easily without having an engineer on site to do that stuff, they're interesting but not very useful. And when you have computing power that is capable of doing these things but costs a fortune, that's not much use either. But when all that stuff starts coming together and coalescing into a set of technologies that's now, whether it's ubiquitous but certainly easily available and cheap, so now we have relatively cheap devices that can harvest energy from the environment, whether it's through photovoltaics or thermocouples or whatever those things are that generate its own power, so it doesn't need batteries, or at least they last a long time. can be meshed up together very easily by people who can climb trees rather than electronic engineers.
Yeah.
And compute power that can then handle that and generate predictions and simulations at low cost. When that all comes together, then that's when digital twin can really be powerful, and IoT can become a real thing that can be useful to whatever the use cases we want. So in this case, it is I think still an experiment, right?
It's still being built out. Yeah,
it's still being built out, and we're working on those models because it also builds out machine learning models that continues to be refined with the more data we get. But again, the aim there is to start looking at forestry management in terms of those aspects of forest fire management and CO2 carbon capture.
And that carbon capture one is the one that for me also kind of has caught the interest of the broader community, right? So the idea of them effectively creating in Calabria, so this is the south of Italy, the green lung, which is going to be this forestry program, but connecting it so that you can actually formally offset and have an accurate view of what impact you're really having. Okay. That's the connection. It's back to the start. Being able to measure and then also be able to predict and monitor the impact is potentially huge, and something that we think is completely replicable across across regions, but also actually across different forms of sustainable programs.
Yeah, I think do you know what I think that's just so fantastic to hear, and clearly you speak knowledgeably, but also with some passion in this as well, right? Because I think, as you said, the technology hasn't been there, Laurence, in yesteryear, and the joining of many different aspects of low power devices, energy harvesting, being able to have these devices deployed readily and easily, but equally from the sustainability point of view, it's fantastic. I mean, we were talking on a discovery call about the fact we were in France and the wildfires, etc.
10 minutes, I think it was. Just to get France in there again.
Yeah. Well, we like France. But no, more importantly, this is real world events that need fixing today, right? And you guys are working on this technology and putting it out there and helping. And I think that's fantastic. And to touch on your point on the carbon offsetting, there's lots of businesses out there saying that you can offset your carbon, right? And I kind of see it sometimes, and I think, well, how do I really know what's being offset? How do I get an accurate record? I can't just sign off my responsibility to carbon offsetting by writing a check, And so I think the project that you work on here to actually see the numbers, presumably would be quite eye-opening as well, actually.
Totally. And I mean, it's maybe slightly off topic from our core, but that topic of the provenance and tracking of your carbon footprint is enormously challenging for any large organisation. Whatever statements are being put out there by big corporations, including ourselves, it is not straightforward to do, especially when you go beyond the directly attributable stuff. So if you look at your supply chain and try and understand how your supply chain is actually genuinely sustainable, it's very hard. Now, regulated industries across Europe now all having to do that as part of the shifts in regulation. That's a good thing, but it means that companies have got to get really serious about it really quickly. Yeah. And we're actually working with a couple of organisations in that space, including Microsoft, but also some quite interesting startups that are helping identify parts of that supply chain in a proactive way, so that you're able to your point, get a holistic view. And that's, in order to hit those targets, that's what we've got to do. We've got to get a holistic view, and then we've got to start building out the measures that are going to make a difference. And we've got to do it in the next 5 to 10 years.
And a consistent view as well. Because some of those calculations are still kind of, it's not clear, and there's no agreements particularly on how they happen. So I think it's starting to get some of that research, which helps kind of standardise some of those calculations as well. I think is
for sure important. I think the other thing though that's interesting around the Calabrian case, but more broadly, Laurence talked about the device side and so on. Also, we talked about the compute side. But another thing that for us has been hugely out from the last 3 to 4 years is just the availability of also geospatial data, right? And the advances around machine learning to allow you to then do more intelligent things with that data set. So I mean, we actually have a collaboration with the Japanese Space Agency, JAXA, to provide 3D maps. It's called AW3D. It's available effectively as a data set, but also there's a number of kind of layers that sit on top of that. And that's something that, again, in different examples, all in Calabria, but also here in the UK, we're working with clients where we have taken that core data set and applied some intelligent analytics on top to help them make decisions that in the past you simply wouldn't have been able to do. Silly example, but a simple example, 5G planning, right? So 5G, turns out trees matter. 4G not so much, buildings was the level that you needed. 5G, you need to have accuracy of where the trees are in order to do your small site cell planning. That's something that in the past you just wouldn't have been able to do.
So even to the extent of understanding whether it's deciduous trees or because in the winter, what is it like? And because that can create radio wave attenuation for their planning, so it makes much more, at least for millimeter wave 5G. So it makes it much more difficult from orders of magnitude more complex from a planning point of view. And if you get that wrong, that's expensive, right? Because rollout of these things become one of the big capital spend for telecommunication companies. So they have to get much more targeted at their planning to cut costs and make it effective. So I mean, geospatial is an important point.
Huge bit. Another one that actually came to mind as we were talking before. So in the UK, we've been running a program in our public sector business around. We called it the Civil Service Data Challenge, and it's been done. It's very much done in collaboration with the Cabinet Office and the ONS and a couple of other organisations. But what we did is we got civil servants from across all the different departments to think about what could they do with data to make a difference in their organisations if they could just get access to it. And it was a brilliant initiative. It ended up 120, 130 submissions, whittled it down, ended up with I think 5 or 6 that went into a finale last year. And actually the winning proposal last year was a team of civil servants that were looking at, again, what can you do with the satellite imagery to analyse the carbon sinks across the UK. And it's actually peat bogs was the issue that they have. Right. And so what they're now in the process of doing, and we're working with those guys, is to develop out a model, a simulation, built on top of the geospatial data, to say, right, those peat bogs, using a generative adversarial network, so a particular flavour of AI, those peat bogs, they're about to collapse, and that's a big deal in the UK. So if you can proactively go and resolve that issue, fix it, you can have a huge impact on the CO2 capture across the UK. So again, it's not always about needing to have the connected everything, so Internet of Everything and all that good story. Sometimes it's about being able to do non-invasive analytical work using the data infrastructure that's now available, using the compute infrastructure in a different way.
But also the challenges that people are facing that you wouldn't necessarily assume was a problem, and I think that's part of the outcome of running things like the UK Data Challenge and working with these civil servants, because we can assume that there's certain problems perhaps that we need to try and remedy, but there's probably a myriad of others that we've not even contemplated, and I guess that's one of the benefit in running something like this. And do you do this sort of on an annual basis, this program?
No, that's the Civil Service Data Challenge is running right now. Okay. So we've I think we might even just have the deadline finished. We're certainly now in down selecting the kind of candidates. There'll be a series now of kind of preheats, and then there'll be a finale towards the end of the year. Watch this space on that front. I mean, it's by a similar vein. We're again timing, but now in September we've just in the process of finalising our E Awards here in the UK, which is another program that we run for early stage startups. So this is about startups that have got a focus on social mission. So how can they impact society? Inevitably, sustainability is a big theme there, but it's also about financial inclusion. It's also about how we can have a lower impact on the environment. And for that program, which is also open, our focus actually is not at all on the technology. It's not at all on the viability necessarily of their solution. It's about how can we help them in their entrepreneurial journey, because it's often really hard for those early stage organisations, great ideas, sometimes even the great tech, but to get on the journey of becoming a viable organisation. And we've got a mentoring scheme that's associated with that, and that's actually run by our foundation. So we have the NTT Data Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm here in Europe, but a really great program. Laurence is a mentor in that scheme, and we've got the event actually tomorrow.
Okay. Amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's really nice to hear. It sounds like a lot of the business is focused around sustainability, this concept of Society 5.0 that you mentioned, and thinking sort of 10 years out, right, which is a very sort of Japanese, Asian way of sort of thinking and having that vision, which is great. I want to get on to a bit more of a deep dive into digital twins.
Sure.
So funnily enough, we were listening to a couple of pods on the way down to London this morning, and we tried to get the most succinct explanation of a digital twin possible, we came up with a digital
doing this bit.
a digital replica of a physical asset.
Yeah.
I think that's
ish.
Yeah.
I think that's as close as what we could get to.
Well, that's where I would start from.
Okay.
Yeah. And but some people have different. I struggled as well when I was looking at this for the work we were doing at the Open. I was going, what is? And I started with exactly that point, and then it kind of breached further into that. So I think one of the other areas it would look at is moving from its ability to simulate and predict things.
Okay.
So it has to have a purpose. So it's not just a replication of a physical thing, but the ability to have that data that can then predict something. And although some people call this a digital triplet, but let's stick with digital twin, is then the ability for it to influence back into the physical environment.
Okay.
So to do
Of
something
course.
to feed back into changing something in that physical environment in some way.
So it's more that kind of physical
cyber,
mashup, really.
To play out scenarios effectively and to predict. Presumably, what's the point of having a replica unless it can make predictions? And simulate in a virtual sense what might happen,
which has been typical in I guess where this all started was manufacturing, especially aerospace within engines. Is that idea of and predictive maintenance is almost that model of digitizing and modeling a physical thing in a certain level of fidelity, and then being able to predict the need for maintenance or early intervention of some sort to do something. Yeah, but the level now is that the fidelity of that data is important, and it gets higher and higher as we go.
Yeah, I think what excites me about digital twin is just the spectrum of what you can use it for. And I know NTT do a lot of stuff from healthcare down to the sports, which I'm excited to get on. As a rubbish golfer, it's still an interesting topic for me. So we'll get on to that.
Just how rubbish you are.
Well, I hope so. I was thinking about this earlier actually when I was looking at, because I downloaded your ebook and had a little read through that, and I always thought, I wonder if there's anything that can tell me where my ball is, because I zigzag across the fairway. So if it can just tell me to walk that way 500 yards and look down, that'd be really good. Which I definitely need. But I mean, some of the stuff that we touched on in the discovery call, like the healthcare stuff that you're looking at, and the real-time like cardiovascular and lung stuff. So tell us a bit more about what you're doing in terms of
Sure.
the healthcare stuff.
Sure. So, I mean, like you say, there's a spectrum, and it definitely starts with that asset thing, and then runs through to something that's we think a little bit more intelligent and useful. It also kind of goes up and down a stack, though. So, when you talk about digital twins, if you talk to people from a manufacturing background, they immediately think of, right, it's the supply chain, it's my factory, I've got a twin of that piece. To Laurence's point, it's linked to predictive maintenance use cases and what you can do that. Now you can go down the stack to a micro level. You mentioned we're working through our medical informatics research centre in California on digital twin of the cardiovascular system. So it's a biodigital twin of an individual. Again, immensely challenging for similar reasons: volume of data, complexity of data, volume of noise in that data, and then being able to make predictions off of that for healthcare purposes. So, do I need to go to the hospital, or is this just a normal flutter?
I was going to add to that as well, because it talks about the cardiovascular system, and there's a reason for that, right? Because it isn't just we've got this habit, I think, over the last decades probably of, and it's a scientific approach of kind of like breaking everything apart into constituent elements and understanding those, right, in isolation. So we kind of take it apart and understand components of it. But with that kind of work, you're trying to bring all of those bits back into a system, right? How does that all work together, right, in different circumstances, and then move into complexity calculation and prediction, and they say at an individual level at that point. That is massively complicated. I think the reason they took that as a challenge was, cardiovascular is still the biggest cause of deaths in the world. So cardiovascular disease, it demands a level of personal medication. So rather than these big interventions, and it's a massively challenging compute problem to understand how that system works together, rather than the component parts of those systems.
So a recent example comes to me, and I don't know whether I'm going on the right path of what you're saying, but everything that happened with obviously Christian Eriksen in the Euros, would this sort of technology allow him back into the sport, which he has, because they would have had to predict what he was going through in terms of his cardio, like you said. So I'm assuming they would have had to use something.
Aspirationally, I think it's fair to say. I mean, the work that we're doing around biodigital twins is still it's in the research stage, right? So, as I mentioned at the start, NTT Group is heavily invested in basic research and into applied research. These guys are working on fundamentals, working with a number of different universities in that space to build out these first. But that's exactly the direction that they're trying to go. It's about personal health. It's about also, though, to my point before, you can kind of go down to that micro level. You can also go up to the macro level. So where it's interesting, again, in the healthcare space, is actually looking at the idea of a digital twin of a nation. So, but the individuals of the nation and the aggregated health of the nation. Again, this is
aspiration,
future thinking. This is the direction it's going. But the investments that are required, but also the capabilities that are emerging in that space are increasingly viable. Right? It's no longer completely absurd to think of having a digital twin of certainly a city in a meaningful way, but also a nation, and so that's where we get. I mean, again, this is the longer term view, but that's where I get really excited about what we as a group are trying to do with the research and development that we are doing. But I don't know. Maybe now is a good time to also bring it down to earth with some very concrete examples of twins that we've been doing in that sports space. That I think they really indicate well what those constituent parts are, the data gathering, the real-time nature of the analytics, the kind of the predictive modelling, but also the visualization of these things, but in a fun way.
And Laurence, it would be good for you to talk about that, obviously, with your position in the business. I just had one point on that. I think, and fantastically introduced to bringing it down to a singular subject. No, it's great. But I think the added level of complexity with all of this is it's life critical, right? So when we talk about sports and when we talk about other elements, you can try and break it several times because you don't want to get it wrong, but you can't do that in healthcare. And then, when we look aspirationally up to a nation, one small mistake along the line of the twin and twinification of something is going to enable that to be exacerbated across. And I think that's really important to touch on, that we have to nail it with that.
You're absolutely right. And that's true. But that's so if we talk about, as I say, some of these long-term aspirational things around life sciences, it's 100% though the case already today when we talk about predictive modelling that you're doing in the telco space, in the utilities space, when we're talking about the a twin of the network and being able to manage that in a coherent way for emergency responses and it's already today critical in that sense. And those, they are. So we do quite a bit of work around smart city in different contexts. We work with Las Vegas, for example. So bringing new meaning to what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Except if you're downtown you're connected to the smart cameras and smart microphones, listening for gunshots and angry crowds. But the in that context, the real-time decisioning, getting the intelligence, getting it to in that context, emergency services and to the local authorities, and enabling them to make decisions rapidly is actually where it's at. But like I say, those are very real use cases today. Finally, that even 3-4 years ago, we were still, I think, on that journey around.
And that prediction in that example isn't. It's not the old school world of there's been an incident, send off a police car. It's looking at crowd build-ups and patterns that are happening, and then proactively placing a vehicle somewhere in the vicinity
to nature of what we spoke about.
Dissuade something from happening, rather than waiting for something to happen. Is the nature of it.
Go on.
No. I want to get on to you talking about the sports side, but it's all right. We're kind of going around it, but I think. So that was that terrible shooting, wasn't there, in Las Vegas? But was it about a year or so back where they hit a converted semi-automatic into a optical called bump stops, I think they were called, or something like that. So using this kind of predictive twin to understand and place a police car, I think that's fantastic. And again, that's stuff that's happening right now. Which is incredible.
Yeah, it's all driven off that data, and then we'll see. I know we will get to sports in a minute,
but
we're looking at that. Some of the like I said, the research work in that cardiovascular twin we were talking about also leads to. It's interesting because it leads on to other challenges, and one of those is it's personal medical information, and it needs high levels of cryptography to secure it and secure areas. So we're looking at areas of quantum compute that are looking at securing that data, because it's very private, and it's very if it gets into the wrong hands, it's a big problem. But also on the compute side, then some of the challenges of understanding how that system works, or system of systems, it becomes a combinatorial compute problem, which can't be done with standard computing to work out how that system works itself. So it leads to that extra investment in work within quantum compute then to deal with understanding that. So although that's way out there, so was digital twins we're going to talk about in a minute with just sports, like 5 years ago wouldn't have been accessible. I think we're looking at 5 or 10 years those areas we're investing in now.
And it's in line with the business, as you spoke about at the start. With NTT's mission of always thinking further ahead, right? And the chances are we'll get there pretty quickly. We were
probably faster than we think.
Yeah, sure. We were just talking about off camera about post-quantum security, some of the associations that we're involved with, and people are working on this now because we're going to need to do something around it. You were going to say, Brad?
No, I was just going to get back into the sport. We've been pushing around it for a while now, and we've all touched on where we were and where we are now. And I think some of the stuff that we're seeing in sport, which I'm sure you'll elaborate on, from where it was to where it is now, some of it's still not right, VAR, for instance. But some of the technology at the moment is very, very good.
It's a matter of opinion, isn't it? Depending on the result at the time.
I mean, if it works for Newcastle, then yeah, it's really good, but it never does.
I think we're just recognising that we're at a table with some serious sports fans.
Yeah.
So we're gonna tread a fine line here.
Yeah. Let's just go straight into it. So just give us an overview of some of the stuff that you've done in the sports. I know you've been with the Tour de France, the golf, obviously. And where it come from and where it is now, effectively. So
yeah, okay. Well, I major on the golf to the Open. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail.
Sounds
but
fantastic.
if I look at what we're doing across the group, we're major sponsors of sports, but we never just do kind of above the line, logo placement. Although it's part of what we do. We also take each of those and use it as an opportunity to deploy, some technology that showcases our research and development credentials, or in some way links to the offerings and the way we can help our clients do their work. So they're all going through transformation programs of one sort or another, and some of the technology that we demonstrate can be used to help them in a non-sports context. So with all of that, we do deploy those technologies. I would say this year, digital twin has been probably the primary, strapline of what we've been talking about with all of our properties, and the three kind of big focus areas for that would be the Tour de France, along with the Tour de France Femme, which was the women's tour, which we're also sponsoring now. The IndyCar series, which was at 17 races across the US, not just oval races, if anybody thinks that. There are 3 different types of race they do in 17
that several times.
Locations.
It's not just
and NTT are the headline sponsor for the series, but also we have a team, NTT Data, or a team sponsor in there as well.
Right.
And then the Open Championship, which is one of the 4 majors, and I always have to say the most venerable, the eldest and most popular of those 4. People are definitely going to give me comments on that.
Yeah.
Which celebrated its 150th anniversary this year in 2022 back in St Andrews, and that's the one I'm mostly focused on. But if I look at all of them in terms of what they all mean by digital twin, it's almost everything that we said a digital twin is in those cases. Some we've missed a bit, like prediction or feedback into the physical environment. So I'll quickly go through each of them, and then we can talk a little bit in depth about the Open. So the Tour de France, our job there as official technology sponsors is to we gather up telemetry data from all of the bikes, most of which are linked in some way to the rider themselves, unless they break it and have to get a new one. Sometimes that breaks the link between the bike and the rider, but we gather that telemetry information. At each of the stages, we have to build what's essentially an ad hoc WAN in that network. Okay. So connecting the bikes to motorbikes riding behind them, or cars. Those connect to helicopters that connect then off to the internet. So those are building what are essentially mission critical ad hoc networks that follow the stage, each of the stages, which is not a trivial exercise. And then we do all of the data analytics of those bikes for the riders, partially for kind of race control, so the management of the event itself, and a lot for fan engagement. So one thing we are seeing a lot in sports, and although we described it as kind of, it's certainly less serious than some of the other stuff we talked about, it has a serious job to do for those sports involved, because they all, at the end of the day, there's a competition for eyeballs on things, whether that's watching streaming services or watching sports or whatever those things are. There's a finite amount of time, and you have to cut through the noise and give people something else to engage with. Now, sports fans, there's some people who will always watch it, irrespective. There's some deep fans, but those are limited in nature, and most sports want to expand their audience to other demographics, largely want other demographics, certainly younger audience who might not have time, for example, to watch 40 hours of golf for the Open, for example. They're not going to sit and watch it all, but they do want to be informed of what's going on. And the other challenge some sports have is just understanding what the heck's going on. If you're not a deep expert in a lot of sports, you really struggle to get understanding enough to enjoy watching it. let alone playing it.
It's almost part gamification in a way, really, of the stats, isn't it? By bringing people in and immersing them in actually what's happening.
This gamification is one thing, but just contextualizing it is another thing. You know, look at motorsports. If you're in the venue, you're watching, especially if it's the Indy 500, that's like 200 laps at 230 miles an hour, most of which you just see a car or a bunch of cars zooming past at 200 miles an hour. You can't really understand what's going on, or more importantly, you might understand who the leader is, but you can't understand what the strategies are behind it. So if you knew, for example, that car has missed a pit stop, or its tyres are starting to degrade, or they filled up with a certain amount of fuel at the last pit stop, you can start predicting what the strategies are from there, and that starts giving a little bit more storytelling to the fans, so they might understand actually at the front of the race is where the leader is. Well, you think that's the leader, but actually there's no way that race control knows this. They know for a fact that driver isn't going to win that race because they know that they haven't pitted and they need to before the end of the race. Now, most fans never see that, or they don't get, or if they do, they have to work hard at it to understand the context of what's going on. So part of the job is taking the data, the telemetry data, in real time. I think that's another aspect of digital twin actually now, is saying it's not taking. I think historic data is important because it builds models, but the ability to gather data in real time at a fidelity level that helps understand what's going on is the key. So taking that data in real time and then building it into predictive models, and then using that in this case to entertain fans, right? Gauge likelihood of wins, likelihood of pit strategies in the IndyCar case. What's going to happen. So help you understand that at the back of the race there might be something more interesting happening at the front or the mid of the race.
I think for me that topic. If we go back to when we talked about digital twin, what are the constituent parts? The physical digital augmentation that's going on in the sports thing is what's actually really interesting. Something we've not talked about so much. So visualizing those twins in a virtual environment. It could be VR, but it doesn't need to be VR. Can be augmented reality often. Again, doesn't need to be. To better understand them, and that's 100% true. Obviously, for the Tour de France, when you download the app and have the augmented reality tabletop view on the stage, which we deployed, and you can download it on your phone. You can take a look at the 3D visualization of the entire course. You can follow each of the players in real time on there, in addition to what you're seeing on the screen. But it's also totally true when you're looking at trying to understand the dynamics of a city, for example, and visualizing, creating the right kind of visuals that help you make decisions about that physical environment. So again, back to that topic of, it's not just about the connected data, it's about making sense of that data, ideally in real time. And that's again where all the sports stuff is so great for that, because everybody intuitively knows what it is that they want to understand, especially the experts. But how do you make it not just work for the real fans? You've got to make it work as well for the casual observer.
Yeah, if that's what your aim is, that's right. That's one of the things that struck me in the work that I've been doing on this over the last few years. It's interesting that we started this as an IoT conversation, and even though it might be a set of things that are connected via the internet, nobody cares, right? What it becomes is a purpose, right? And at the end of that when you get eyeballs on it and humans understanding it, it's a creative design problem at that point. So it moves from an engineering centric, connecting networks up and understanding the system on a chip or whatever it is you put in place at the one end, but at the other end it's a creative design challenge to get that in front of somebody, that contextualize that data, or those data I should say, in something that can be actionable in whatever the use cases you're trying to deploy. It could be entertaining or engaging a fan, or it could be making a critical decision on a new road network you're going to lay out, whatever those things are. But you have to understand what you're doing, and it becomes, you can't ignore that last bit. I think it becomes a really important aspect of understanding who's going to use it for what purpose, and then deploying it in that way.
Yeah.
Because I can guarantee there'd be no purpose in us taking all of this sports data and sticking it all on a complex spreadsheet and lobbing it on a screen for somebody to, because they would have to spend too many calories to understand what on earth is going on.
Yeah.
But we then take it back a level and understand the challenge we're trying to undertake with that in association with the sport itself, so with the rights holders. So we don't do this in splendid isolation. We understand, because our nature, to be honest, as a business is to understand the client's challenge, not just to do stuff that suits us. It really is. We could do because it's our money, but we don't. So we take time to understand the challenge, and then we build a structure that answers that. But that creative design problem is something I think is often forgotten.
And I think that really came to life this year at the Open. So more than I think probably any of the previous years that we've worked with that, the digital twin design element that's built on the entity data wall, which is it's kind of the centerpiece, bringing together all of that real-time data that we can find from across the event, putting it front and center in the spectator village, right at the heart. We've done that for many years, but now bringing in the real-time digital twin and being able to actually interact with that has been incredibly well received.
Yeah, it's
more than I'd actually expected, to be honest.
This is, I think, all our learnings over the last few years. We took this opportunity on the 150th anniversary to really step it up a level and take it to a kind of a much more realistic view of what's going on there. And I think, again, there was a convergence, as we spoke about, a convergence of availability of technologies that allowed that to happen. Yeah. I think so. The first was, so the Open takes place usually in a different venue or cycles around venues, but it's not in the same place every year, unlike some of the other majors. It makes it a difficult infrastructure challenge.
You really do like
it. I know. So it's a difficult, because people say, why haven't you done the Open? And it's because it's in a different location. So infrastructure is key, right? So the RNA who run the event are now, as they host it, instead of just building grandstands and toilets and food and beverage stands, they're investing a lot in connectivity. So it's largely fibre being rolled out, being implemented in those venues. So they'll go back to those venues, because without that, nothing else will work. So that investment in infrastructure is important. But luckily, it comes back to St Andrews every 5 years, but not discounting any pandemics that happen in the middle of it. And it's interesting looking at what happened in 2015 last time and 2022 this time, because we missed a couple of years. And the difference in the technology availability, I think, it's really amazing at the time, or at least what's available at reasonable cost, I would say. So the first was our ability to map that golf course, again, at a level of detail that wasn't possible at reasonable cost in the past. So that was done using some of the stuff we talked about, the joint venture with the Japanese Space Agency. That's at a global level, but this is down at a lower level. So we were getting, I think 6 centimeter accuracy of, so just using drones and auto-rectified imagery. So it's just looking at different images at different points and then mapping shadows on it and then building out a map of the golf course at 6 centimeter accuracy. And then using LiDAR mapping, again on drones, to 2 centimeter accuracy on the greens, which gave us enough point cloud information that we could build a very accurate model of the golf course, which is kind of interesting in its own right, and we get very accurate data, but it's boring to look at, because if you get a point cloud and look at it on a screen, it's a point cloud. It doesn't look interesting. You can then put a mesh on it, and that's still not very interesting to look at. And we spent I was amazed how much effort had to go into then creating a textural view of it. So I had to get it back into a nearly photorealistic view of that golf course. And that includes taking in open data sources of the buildings around St Andrews, the beach, the sea, taking the weather, building cloud models, all of that stuff, and how the shadows work. Suddenly, if you get really ambitious, it gets really complicated. But it's a complicated technical question. But again, it's a creative design question. So suddenly you're looking at something that looks great and is photorealistic, but getting it like that and choosing the difference between a gorse bush here or a different type of tree there that you can then overlay onto that texture map is essentially a creative process, right? So we have a creative aspect to this, and that's the first bit. So we're very very accurate map of the golf course that we can then use as our baseline of the as you said, the digitization of a physical thing. That's our digitization of a physical thing. And then the next aspect of it was the real-time data gathering. Okay. So in the past, up until this year, the data gathering has just been a bunch of volunteers walking with the group themselves, so the golfers, and as the ball lands, they have to walk up to it, so it takes a physically long time to walk. If you've knocked it, if the player's knocked it 320 yards, they have to walk 320 yards to get to it, measure it with a very low level of precision. They can just say it's on the fairway or in the water, whatever, and then that gets transmitted back to us. But it takes however long it takes for that group to walk up, and they don't run. I can guarantee they dawdle up to it. Now in 2022, we were using essentially laser rangefinders, some trigonometry on cameras, plus the walking scorers. To add all of that together meant within, depending how far they hit it, it was within 20 seconds or so of the ball being hit, we were getting the ball position to an accuracy level of between 2 and 6 centimeters transmitted back to us. That meant you could literally watch it on TV and at the same time watch a shot view app. So you could choose the holes you want to follow or the players you want to follow and watch what was happening in real time. Yeah. And the other aspect I'd say is when you're watching it on TV, you're watching whatever the feature groups are that the directors want to follow, usually the ones that get most media attention. That's going to be the big names. There are 156 players on there, all of which get some guaranteed TV time through their contracts, but it's almost nothing, to be honest. Yeah. But if you wanted to follow, but all the data's gathered for everybody. Right, it's all gathered for everybody all the time. So if you wanted to follow...
Remind me, it was 32,000 shots, was that?
It's 32,000, just over 32,000 shots in the 4-day competition, depending on how big the cut is at the time, and how well they do. And how dry the conditions are, very low scoring this time. So it was, about 32,000 shots taken back. But you wouldn't see, it's a linear feed on the broadcasts, so you don't see everything, you see what you're shown. But we gather all the data, so if you wanted to follow any player or all of them, you could do that and use the data to recreate those shots or watch them happen in real time.
And that's what I love, because I am, it's fair to say, interested in the golf, but not, I'm not a fanatic in that literal sense. And the idea, though, now that I can, also after the event, I can go and I can have a look and see how did golfer XYZ play every single hole. I can imagine I could go to St Andrews and I could actually line up and say, right, okay, so how did Tiger do it? How did so-and-so do it? And you can follow the different strategies that they're doing. Yeah. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, which you couldn't have done before this, because all we knew was on the fairway. Now you can go, these players are hitting to the left further than these players, and they're making different strategy choices. And you can, again, it's about turning those data into stories, both visually, but also, you can even add commentary onto that and say this is why these choices are being made, and you can then start understanding the decisions that the players are making.
Yeah, I think your point about IoT earlier today about IoT being a class of technology, but within itself could have the potential to be not that interesting, is a really poignant thing here. So data into stories. So data by itself is just data. But can you convert that into something that's the consumer is going to be interested in? And I think now, given the fact that they've got access to this and they can see it and it's been here at the Open, they're going to come to expect this. But also probably come to expect to see advancements as well, right? And for this to get better and better. One thing that was quite interesting, we were talking about mapping data, and it just sort of dawned upon me in my head. I just wondered whether or not, in the future we could have kind of a satellite feed and overlace that over the textures, right? So you're not having to build out the map itself. You could perhaps have it live, but obviously there's costs of having live satellite feeds, etc.
Right? Drones. The thing I was saying about how technology has changed since from 2015, the last time I was there, and now one of those is a big one is drones. Is the ubiquity of drones. I know there's some more regulations that have come in place now, but and the ability for those drones to carry equipment and to transmit that, useful payloads of equipment, and to be able to transmit that, in real time. I think it's
potentially high enough to take a shot, right? If they're stable enough, good enough optics on the cameras,
even a mesh of them, right? So I mean, it's slightly again off topic, but in the same space. I mean, as part of the work that we did in Japan, so the sister organisations in Japan around the Olympics, that we actually did a trial of a multi-drone real-time playback where we were meshing up 4 different drone views in real time of the entire sailing arena, effectively. So you had, and it was then played back as a 16K monster wall on the side of the event. It's again, the compute is there to do that now. There's some cleverness there in stitching it together and making so that it works coherently. But again, that's a whole other rabbit hole that we can go down. We'll come back and talk about that stuff because that's really interesting.
Yeah, talking about rabbit holes as well. Something that sort of dawned upon me was what the gaming and betting industry make of digital twins. Right? Because of this predictive nature, and it's clearly only going to get better. And your laugh kind of suggests that you've thought about this as well. Is this potentially going to put them out of business, or is it?
I think quite the opposite, to be honest. I think, so I laughed because we were gaming you've been gambling, right?
Yeah,
so, let's call it gambling. So that's one area that fits nicely into digital twin because it's prediction by nature, or is calculating odds, and it's an area that within sports is obviously lucrative for the people who can either get the right angles or can use it to calculate, like the gaming companies. So they already do that, right? So there's already some companies whose job it is to do that. So we also work at the BMW International Open in Munich, and that's the data there is gathered by a company called IMG Arena, and that's basically their business model. They go on the golf tours, they gather the data in real time, and then they use that to provide prediction models to gambling models, and that's how they make money. Now we kind of organised a data feed similar to the Open, so that we could then do the digital twin of that and start using it for fan engagement, which wasn't in their current business model. So we had to kind of organise things like a deliberate 30-second delay in that feed, so that we weren't able to kind of put stuff on our screen at the venue or online before they were able to shift on. So there's a whole ecosystem there. So
sure.
I think the other, and from the kind of gaming, the esports or gaming businesses, they're looking at this from again a fidelity of data. So the more accurate you can get, the more accurate simulations they can make for better games. And including, and this is an area that I think will open up a lot with sports, and people will shudder at this, will be rights management. So if you can, what happens, for example, if and this is happening now, where you're able to model exactly the movements of Lionel Messi when he's playing games against certain, within a team against another team, and model every movement of his limbs and his gait movement and everything, and recreate that in photorealistic in something that isn't quite Lionel Messi but looks an awful lot like him and moves like him and sprints like him, then who owns the rights to that? And data is becoming a big area now. So video rights are kind of that's an area well established and understood, and can definitely get a bit more nuanced. But data is becoming a new area of value for sports rights holders that they can do a lot with, for gambling, for games, for performance improvement, equipment manufacturing. There's a load of different use cases for data, and all of that will require increasing fidelity. I'll use this word fidelity, but depth of data, understanding and better depth of what they get.
I suppose with the gambling industry, there's always going to be an element of human error as well, right? Like you could predict that McIlroy is going to roll in from 3 yards, but if his head's gone because he's just come out of the water, he could miss it. So I suppose with the gambling,
well, it depends how good the predictiveness is, right?
And every sport's different. I mean, golf has got a lot of psychology. It's quite different because it's not it's not, I don't know what the phrase is, it's not an adversarial. You don't have somebody throwing a ball at you, but you have it's very much down to you, and this idea of it's called kind of functional resilience. So how do you, under different circumstances, especially in the Open, usually the weather changes every 20 minutes normally, except this year, and how do you keep playing consistently, and that becomes a deep psychological, which is quite hard to model. Interestingly, and this is another aside, but NTT, as another piece of research, is something called the Sports Brain Science Project, which is looking at functional functional MRI scans, so functional changes in brain patterns between, let's say, very talented amateurs and elite athletes playing the same sport, which is at the moment focused largely on baseball and softball. It's in Japan. They love that stuff.
J-League.
And I did talk to the professor there about, is that something translatable to golf, and he said no. Because of that, because baseball and softball is a responsive sport.
Yeah.
Somebody's throwing something, you're responding to it, where golf is none of those things. So it's a very different challenge.
I mean, that's, you touched upon it there, but I think the different ecosystems that can come as a result of, creating a twin is something that we need to think of as part of this Society 5.0 movement in general, right? We're talking about gambling and betting, right? Quite the opposite for putting them out of business. It would actually allow them perhaps to do a microtransaction of bets, and for the consumers to sort of bet interactively at that time while something's happening based upon predictive modelling. And there's a big topic about whether or not that's a good thing in society for gambling and betting companies to be able to do that, but that's a whole other rabbit hole.
It is a rabbit hole. Yeah, we should probably avoid it. But I'll just say one thing. I'll just say one thing, because I think it done well. You talk about gamification rather than gambling. I think it's a nice, it's a good way of engaging fans in something that they might not otherwise be interested in. Put a little bit of a game inside it. Let's say money isn't involved, but there's that idea of placing a.
But I think you're right, and I think going back to the point around, I think the consumers are going to expect that right now that they've seen it and they know that they can watch the Open or various sporting events with this type of convergence and of technology. They're going to expect it, they're going to want it, and they're going to want to see it better, right?
I mean, it's not going to stop. You're right, and there's more and more that people will want to see. I'm sure somebody will, if you're showing any of our kind of short view simulations we put up there will be somebody for sure that will say that the ball trajectory that we show on that is nominal, I think it's called, as in inaccurate. I mean, where it starts is accurate and where it ends is accurate. But the ball flight is not accurate. That we show, because it doesn't take into account the way the ball spins, which creates lift basically through the way the ball is structured.
But the only way to do that,
and it doesn't take into account winds, which obviously shows it lands differently, but it is accurate where it starts and ends.
You could put a gyro in the ball, couldn't you?
You can't put anything
to do anything like that.
I see.
Part of the challenge.
All of it's got to be tracking. This is a big area for sports as well. Is you can, as long as you're not playing a competition of any sort, you can do it like that.
I see. Okay.
But you can, but kind of passive sensors as opposed to active sensors is really another area of IoT that probably isn't explored. And some of the stuff you talked about, the 12K screens at the sailing, if you get very accurate, high frame rate video, like high definition, high frame rate, that can be deployed in situ, you can create a lot of data from that isn't otherwise. Isn't otherwise available, and is collected passively rather than through some wiring up somebody or wearing wearables or anything, which I think is important.
Completely agree. I mean, to take it up a level in terms of we're just beginning to scratch the surface, I think, of what is viable. It's and certainly when we talk to the rights holders and the people that are actually in the business of doing this, they're super excited about what they can do in the next steps. It's about, again, augmenting that experience. It's about making the gamification piece, not the gambling piece for sure. Visualization, making it, upgrading it really. And it occurs to me that to go full circle links back to the start of what we were talking about, right? What are we trying to do with this technology right now? We're trying to create more enriched human experiences without breaking the planet, right? That's underpinning what this Society 5.0 thing is about. That's what we're, as a group, investing in. Not alone, of course. There's lots and lots of players in this space, but it's about creating an upgraded reality, and actually that's the hashtag that our colleagues from NTT Research are using for this whole program. It's we need a new reality. We need a hyper reality that is that connected physical and digital, but amazing experiences, interactive, enriched experiences with all of that data and information around us. If we're a consumer, we expect it. If we're a citizen, we're increasingly expecting that. And obviously for businesses, there's huge opportunities to the way that they work with one another, but also how they, to your point, create new business models and new services that will take us to the next level. I mean, hugely exciting, I think.
Yeah, massively exciting. And it's changed it for me. Luckily, my boss isn't listening, but when we're at work and the golf is on, for instance, just what you can visualise, if you know the courses and watch quite a lot of it, what you can visualise just by looking at an app on your phone whilst you're working very hard. you can kind of see if you're following a certain player like Rory, you can kind of see where they are on the course or if they're near the top.
This is the new reality of work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
You know, so we're in a
no, exactly. Yeah, work-life balance.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you can just if you're following something, it's just changed the whole consumer thing. And not to beat it around the bush, I think everything in terms of sport is how many fans have you got, how many people are watching, because it's a money business, really, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you've got enough,
dance around that topic, but it is.
It really is. Yeah, 100%. And that's what it's all about. That's why you've got such big sponsors and everything, and there's still got betting sponsors in football, for instance, like trying to get away from it, but they're still there. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting future, and I suppose in very short, because obviously with time and stuff like that, and it's gone really well. What do you see in short the future holding for these technologies? If you were to, unless you want to give us an exclusive, is there anything that's coming up that you can talk about, or just what's coming up? What does the future hold for it?
Big question. Right.
Big question.
I'm going to say two areas. I think that for me, I'll talk about sports stuff, and you can do everything else in the world. So for the sports stuff, I think one will be, where can we get more data, and that would be useful to help engage fans in the story a bit more, and to build on that design experience. So we now have these two. I'm going to use the word paradigm because we haven't used that in the whole podcast, so take that one off. Paradigms is we've got the personalised mobile app, which is designed, which is mobile optimised, personalised, and is that there's a personalised head down experience. We've got that thing where you do that, and we have the data wall, as you said, the 20-metre screen in venue, which is a heads up shared social experience. So everybody kind of gathers together, and it's very different. Design problems there that we have, and I think we'll be looking at how we can bring more data in that has relevance to helping those two different worlds kind of join together. I think that would be one area. It could be getting even something as simple as understanding wind speeds at different altitudes. So the wind you feel here is different from what the golf ball feels at 30 meters up, for example. So can we get that in and understand that a bit better? And another big area of which will be about precise data gathering. And probably a little bit more linked to the feedback into the real world will be around sustainability, especially of these sports events. So we've got back to in-person events. These are, the Open itself brings in 300,000 people for 4 days. The Indy 500 is 400,000 people in 1 day. The biggest CO2 equivalent impact of those events is fans travelling there, or the choices they make, I should say, in terms of how they choose to get there. And we're doing some work with Cardiff University now on frameworks around how to understand that, and how we link that both to the measurement of that and the nudges you'd make to those fans to make different choices about how they would get there, and their sustainability choices, and how that might make longer term decisions for those individuals even outside of the sport itself. So I think we'll be doing a lot of work around that, I think, in sports events over the next few years. So sustainability will be the big topic. So even in the heavy petrol sports like Indy 500 or Formula 1, the sustainability impact of the sport itself isn't that high. It's the tour trucks that come up, it's the inside the ropes teams that are doing all the work, and it's the fans travel is the big impact that we need to look at.
I mean, one we just signed up to ULife in our business, which rewards people for walking and so on and so forth. And one would imagine if you can analyse the data from fans' chosen mode of transport, or perhaps rewarded them perhaps in ticket sales to reduce the cost of the ticket and how they got there. Lots of different
it's all about
ways
feedback stuff again, and some of it is about some of that is that some of that doesn't sound like the real-time data gathering, but some of it is because a lot of the new whether they're diesel generators or moving to hydrogen fuel cells or whatever those things are, they're telemetrized equipment that we can then gather data off in real time. Because a lot of these, I was quite surprised actually, not particularly open, but a lot of sports events are still done with paper manifest sheets and still done on Excel, and it's not managed in real time in any way or analysed in a way that can be operationalised to make different choices. And we want to kind of also use our fan engagement tools, which are the app and the big screen, to get fans more engaged in that process. So if we're telling them, and definitely again talking about the human interaction and storytelling is not necessarily putting a downer on the fact that they come to an event and making it all negative. Is how do you turn that into something positive and engage them in it and get them involved in that process somehow, to then, whether that is offsetting their stuff or somehow getting involved in a broader program of sustainability work, but it's using the vehicles we built around engagement with fans about getting them involved in that process. So that's my stuff. Whew. You've just got everything else.
I'm not sure how to follow that really, but I mean, again, if I try and take it up a level, augmented experiences that are being driven by real-time data that enrich our lives. That's kind of where we're going with this stuff. Nice. So if we talk about, we've also managed, by the way, which I'm delighted to not talk about, the metaverse.
That's one of my quick questions.
And I'm very keen that we don't do that. But these experiences in our private lives, in our work lives, where the data is just there, and we can get the information that's coming out of that data in a coherent way, in an interesting way that allows us to make decisions. Yeah. If we talk about the cardiovascular via digital twin, then very clearly that's got a very material impact, and we've seen that already. How people are working with their Fitbits, their Apple Watches, and the measured me movement and everything that's going on around that. But the same is true in why are you not thinking about the way that you do your day job in the same way? Why is that data not there in a way that's allowing you to make decisions on it, and in an entertaining and
purposeful way, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a nice word. Yeah. It's probably a nice place to end. Kind of full circle back to that Balance Society 5.0 vision. Yeah. Enriched experiences for humans without breaking the planet.
Perfect.
Honestly, I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this has been amazing.
It's so poignant to where we are as a business, what we want to talk about, the content that we want to put out. You guys are clearly really passionate, and I think we could just talk for hours and hours and hours about it. But sadly, we don't have that time, and neither probably would you want to give it to me at this point. So we're going to wrap up.
We'll come back.
Yeah, it would be nice to do that actually. Maybe in a few years' time, just to sort of cross-reference where we were. We'll talk about data and stories and say, well, we thought this actually in 2022, but we were a little bit wrong, and we actually segued into this, and I think that would be really, really useful because there's always different paths that people can take and so on. But I've really, really enjoyed it.
Very much so from me as well. It's been amazing.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, excellent. Would you like to do the quick fire questions as always?
Yeah, well, it's good. You laugh, but genuinely, we've got a list here and it says select 3. One of them is, what are your thoughts on the metaverse? I'm glad you said, don't ask that question.
So I think the last two times, the last two times we've asked that, it's been a resounding, it's a kids game basically thing. People not liking the metaverse and people thinking it's a waste of time. So we will skip that question.
We will skip that one.
We will talk about something else.
Yeah, I'll just ask one question then, and you both can give me one answer. I suppose the best way to start is, if you were to summarise technology landscape this year in one word, what would that one word be? Your face says it all, so I think you're up first.
This year?
This year, technology landscape in one word.
Well, I'm going to say digital twin. That's with a hyphen, so that's okay.
I
have to say that because that's been in all of our sports stuff, and a lot of our investment focus has been on that for this year for me. Yeah.
Connected.
Nice. Biggest inspiration as a person? I think we need to change this from quick fire to questions
to thoughtful,
thoughtful insight
images of the future. My dad.
Nice. Whatever you answer is not going to be as good.
I'm going to, just because it's the first name that popped into my head, and I've been talking about him yesterday. Stanley Kubrick, I would say, is who I would say. I keep coming back to. He's still my go-to guy for films of all different types. I mean, not like stereotyped in one way, but of also, you know, some of the, obviously with if we're talking about technology, 2001, HAL, all that stuff, but a whole range of different comedies and others. So yeah, Stanley Kubrick would be my man.
The last one hopefully will be a one-word answer. Driverless cars as they are now, would you have one, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
There we go. Some people do say no, they're apparently still scared of them.
I wouldn't let it drive.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, that's one way around it.
What a fantastic
Look, gentlemen, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a pleasure, and I really do hope that we get the opportunity to come back. I always forget this, so I'm going to make a effort to not forget this, is your social medias. Mm-hmm. So where can the viewers find you, social media, for the company and yourselves?
So for me, I'm at Twinstan, TWINSTAN, in most flavours of social media. And we as NTT Data can be found at NTT_data_UK.
Perfect.
There you are. And I'm at the same website. And I'm just on LinkedIn, I think mostly active on LinkedIn, so just Laurence Norman. Okay. Search me.
Excellent.
Like me.
Thank you guys, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. That's been for us as well. Thank you very much.